Reactive training systems.
You know, plus multiple days where I just slept in the back of the truck on the side of the road.
That's rough.
Yeah. Yeah, that first training session in North Dakota when I got down to there after driving through Canada was awful. My body was like, "No, you're not allowed to move today. You just treated me like shit by sleeping in the back of a truck, and we're gonna let you know it."
Well, man, I've had some instances where, you know, traveling that long, well, not that long, but traveling long distances in a car and training afterwards is at best crappy and at worst injurious. So,
right, yeah. It was not very productive. Other than I guess it was productive in the sense of trying to get some movement back into my body, but
yeah. But you're getting settled down there now in Georgia.
Yep. Well, not necessarily settled, but settled enough, functionally settled, I suppose I could call it. You know.
Functional, yeah. I mean, that's like the first step, I think. At least for me, it was like get to a point where I can sleep in a real bed and not an air mattress. Like that's the first threshold, and then there are multiple progression points off of that, right?
Yeah, for sure,
Like rebooting life.
A lot of it too hinges on the fact that my house is still on the market. Made some changes to some things. Hopefully that'll help move it, and then once that does, then I can buy all the equipment, rebuy the equipment that I'll need for the home gym and get that set up, and then I'll feel a lot better about where everything's at.
Yeah. So that can be a note to anybody listening to this that happens to live in Alaska. Buy Ross's house.
Exactly. Do it. Go buy my house.
All right.
Yeah, high five. House comes with free high fives.
See you at nationals every year, right? Speaking of nationals, how's training shaping up? We're what, 3 weeks out?
Yeah,
right?
It's starting to catch some traction.
Oh.
That first week was real rough because, like an idiot, I didn't respect the Georgia sun when I first got here, and I got super sunburnt, super bad, and I couldn't hardly lift at all that whole week. Like, I went to go bench, and 355 was so excruciatingly painful that that was my top single, was 355, and normally that's like a set of 5. But like I just couldn't, the pain was just so intense. I couldn't squat for the first like 4 days afterwards. There's no way I was carrying a bar on my back. So
yeah, it's a rough way to go.
Yeah. Oh, and it was crazy too. It totally zapped my ability to do the down sets. Like even, you know, like the deadlift right now is a single at an 8 and then a double at a 9. And I did my single at an 8 and it moved well. And I went to go do the double at a 9 and I did 1 rep and I was like, that was almost a 10. I can't do a double.
Right.
So dropped a significant amount for the low drop sets, and those still sucked. When I finally was able to squat, the first triple at 85%, I did a single and was like, wow, that moved real weird. This isn't good. I'm not even gonna be able to do a triple here. What the heck is going on? And I had to drop the weight more on that. And I just there was no ability to sustain any kind of training load. It was super weird.
Yeah.
And the second week, everything was good. This week's everything's even better. So
yeah,
momentum is building in a positive direction. So,
you know, that's interesting and kind of, I'm kind of connecting a couple dots here, and I'm trying to figure out how I want to say it so that it's clear. But there's some evidence now. I was reading one of Chris Beardsley's posts, evidence showing that your perception of fatigue is correlated to muscle damage, right? Even things like motivation to train, feelings of tiredness, and things like that seem to be correlated to muscle damage. And the hypothesis is that, you know, that's the primary that's the primary thing for that kind of fatigued, crappy feeling. That thing that all of us meatheads have called CNS fatigue or central fatigue for the last, 10 or 15 years. That it's really tied to muscle damage and not anything central. And I mean, I get how that would be possible. And uh, I I can get on board with there being a correlation there, and that with muscle damage being correlated and you know what's the word I'm searching for here? A factor that kind of goes along with everything else,
Right.
that contributes to the whole experience. But I can't think that that's the only thing, because there's similar perceptual things that happen outside of muscle damage, like it's a similar perception that you have when you are out in the sun for too long, and you have that's actually a really good one, like that sun sapped energy feeling that you have when you've been out in the sun for too long.
Right.
That feels very similar, you know. You get a similar thing with being in the cold for too long, but the feeling is a little bit different for that one.
You can never hold too long.
Says the guy who lived in Alaska. But
Right.
yeah, I don't know. I think that, I mean, sure, muscle damage is a factor there, but I think there's some other stuff going on as well. One idea that I've floated out there was maybe an immune system response or something like that. Um, I don't know. I mean, I'm a little bit out of my depth. We're kind of ranging far from practical implementation stuff, but I think that stuff is interesting.
And then you start having to try to use some more medically correct terminology, and those are the ones that usually start tripping me up.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, there's definitely, I think, there's got to be something else there besides muscle damage. Just thinking about it too, this recent sunburn episode is, of course, it affected my squat and bench because of the pain in the skin, and I just couldn't go into those positions that I was supposed to go into. I couldn't get into an arch. I had to flat back because it hurt so bad to try an arch and all those things. But there was no pain associated in like the skin and the sunburn when I was deadlifting. That was fine. But yet I had a clear lack and inability to perform how I felt I would have been able to perform, especially when warm-ups were fine. The top set, the by 1 at 8 was fine. And then all of a sudden it just, once I hit that, everything just went to shit.
When you can track changes to work capacity too, right? Like, I think that's a great example. What you were saying is that normally, you have a top set and you reduce by this much weight for your back off sets and so on, but your ability to maintain that level of performance was degraded.
Big time.
To me, that's a pretty clear indicator that, there's a fatigue issue going on. And you could say that it has something to do with dehydration or something like that, which is probably a factor. You wouldn't expect that to last for a week, but um, I suppose maybe it could last for a few days if you weren't conscientious about getting rehydrated. But one way or another, it's I don't know. It's just interesting as I kind of watch how exercise science is focusing on things as being like one step removed from that process. Like, I get the sense that they're focusing on peripheral things a lot right now. Um, but something as basic as fatigue, I don't know. I mean, maybe basic is the wrong word because it's obviously very complex and very complicated, but it's so fundamental, you know. Um, it's it's obviously a major player,
Right.
and I think that we're taking our attention off of it. And that's not necessarily a bad thing until we start thinking that the thing that we're focusing on now is the answer. So it's more of a I don't know, maybe I'm just kind of doing a little bit of hand wringing over where our attention is going as like powerlifting coaches and stuff like that, but it seems like the attention is focusing on the peripheral, and maybe that's what's required to answer some interesting questions. But from a practitioner standpoint, from somebody who's trying to implement this in the real world with real people, you can't take your eye off of the systemic stuff either.
Right.
Anyway, weird ramble there.
Well, you're good at those.
Yeah. Well, when we have tactics meetings and stuff like that, I frequently derail them with my random musings on training theories and stuff. But
isn't that why we have tactics meetings? So you have
a little bit. Look, guys, I need an audience for this. I have a weird idea, and somebody's got to tell me that I'm crazy sooner or later, or else I'm gonna fucking just go Kanye West over here. Gradually more and more off the rails because nobody's around to say, "Hey, dude, you're venturing pretty far off the beaten path."
Yeah. Can you go too far off the path though? Especially in something like that. I mean, it's not like you're applying it yet or anything. It's just.
I mean, you try not to, but I suppose if you did start to go too far off the path, then it wouldn't be obvious. If you're going crazy, maybe it's not obvious to you, something like that. Although, I don't know, I'd be the world's first person to go crazy on training theory stuff. I don't know, maybe my history needs to be better, but.
Yeah. I mean, well, should we go back to nationals then?
Yeah.
And get away from you being crazy?
Yeah. I mean, that's it's always good to take the topic away from that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be a good time. I'm excited.
Yeah, me too.
Not just for my own lift, but all the other RTS lifters that are going.
Yeah.
We got quite a few. Hopefully we can put that team together and defend our combined team victory from last year.
That'd be pretty cool if we can pull that off.
Yeah.
Do you remember offhand how many we've got going to nationals?
Not off the top of my head, but I can look.
Yeah. It's always fun, to I don't even know, like there needs to be kind of a word for that kind of Comic-Con style experience, but it's like powerlifting's version of, I suppose the Arnold is more Comic-Con. Yeah.
We got 22 lifters on the roster.
Nice.
So, and I know there's a few that we coach that are going to be there that aren't competing. They're just going there to volunteer and be a part of the meet.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Couple Alaskans are going down since it's easy for them to go to Washington and compared to Florida.
Yeah.
Which is funny. I move and it just made the travel to nationals just as hard as it would have been to go from Alaska this time instead of it making it easier.
So you'll have to wait for the next competition before you start to realize some of the travel advantages of moving near Atlanta.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Aside from cheaper airfare.
The big benefit, if you're gonna travel a lot. Which
that was one of the reasons why Atlanta was picked.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm excited too. I can go home to see my parents and fly to the airport 20 minutes from my parents' house for less than $300 round trip. before that was $1,000.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I think there's some distinct things about living in certain parts of the world, really. Certainly in certain parts of the states that um, you get used to things and learn things that are strange to other people. You know, I remember living in North Dakota, and flights were really expensive everywhere. You know, if I could find a flight that was less than $500, then that was a good day. You
Yeah.
know, and the willingness to drive places. You know, um, like driving 2 hours to go to a restaurant for dinner was not weird. You know, um, where if you lived in Maryland and you were willing to drive 2 hours to get somewhere for, let's say, for dinner, I mean, that puts a lot of stuff within your range, you know.
Right.
And I would imagine all that stuff is extended for people that live in Alaska.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a lot of driving up there.
Yeah.
That's for sure. And you want to go do something for the weekend. It was usually it was like an hour to go wherever you wanted to go. At least there wasn't just a quick trip down the road to go over here to do this or that. It was usually a good haul. Pack up all your toys and camping gear and drive way out. So whatever. I'm sure when I want to go do that stuff here, I'm going to have to drive a ways.
Are you gonna keep living the outdoor life in Atlanta?
I mean, I'm
This
going to try
sunscreen, I hope.
that stuff a little bit more. That was one of the ideas, is that with it being so inexpensive to travel out of Atlanta, I'm going to be more apt to travel to different places to get my snowboarding fix in the winter rather than just snowboarding the same spot all the time.
Got it. Yeah.
So now I can start making my bucket list of places I want to go ride and start checking those off. I mean, I got a few places in my mind, but when I was living in Alaska, I never considered those places because I had a backyard that I could just go to for free, compared to spending thousands of dollars just to get out of the state to go do that.
Right.
So,
What places are on your snowboarding bucket list?
oh, well, like I definitely want to go to Whistler. Definitely want to go to Jackson Hole. I'd like to go to some of the places in Utah and Montana. There's a few places, obviously, I'd love to go to the Swiss Alps, or Vienna this summer was amazing. So I'd want to go back to Vienna and go hit up the mountains just outside of Vienna. So make another Das Gym trip.
Those are fun.
For sure.
Those are fun. I always enjoy those trips.
Yeah, that was such a cool time. That's going to be a hard place to top ever.
Right.
Yeah, look at that shirt.
Yeah. both sporting 10-year shirts today.
Yeah, I mean, how many of our listeners do you think actually know what happened?
Well, we can go through that, sure. So this summer, that was in August, early August. That was the RTS 10-year anniversary. So to kind of celebrate, we put together a seminar, and it was like, well, it's our 10-year anniversary. Where do you want to have that? You know, like, so for me, it was an easy choice. I want to have it at the best gym that I know of. So we went to Das Gym in Vienna. And I know that I think I've still got a story highlight on my Instagram that kind of goes through that. And if you've never seen the place, then it's worth looking into. It's like, I don't know, meathead heaven, I guess. Like, they really take like this iron culture thing seriously.
Yeah.
So, I mean, of course, top of the line equipment and The thing that stands out to me, though, is that they put as much effort into the atmosphere and just the overall attitude of the gym as they do into the equipment itself. Um, so I don't know. It's worth looking into. And if you are just kind of a fan of just, it doesn't matter what it is if it involves lifting weights. You know, if you're just kind of a fan of that type of culture, then you'll find something that really kind of blows you away at that place. So for me, I find a lot of things there that I think are just beyond cool. So
Oh yeah,
yeah.
that place is amazing. The place is amazing. The people were a ton of fun to hang out with and train with and lift with and eat food with, and yeah, it was amazing. It's
So we
absolutely
brought all the coaches out. So you, Jim, Mark, Polly, Isabel was there. John was new at the time, so he couldn't make it. But um, anyway, brought everybody out and had a seminar, and it was cool because I think everybody got to talk about, I don't know, the stuff that they're really excited to talk about. You know, like from a seminar standpoint. You know, I got to talk about emerging strategies and programming stuff and some of the stuff I'm working on. And Jim got to talk about the nutritional component, and you got to talk about just kind of the mental side of training. Have you found I guess a more accurate way to put that?
I suppose just like the title, just the effective mental training.
Yeah.
Trying to find ways to make it efficient and like hopefully as I keep playing with that animal, ways that will like help most people. I don't think that there is ever, much like programming, there's not a one size fits all. You know, psychology is a deep, complex topic with lots of different ways to do things. So to come up with a way to work your mental game in powerlifting and make sure that you're not creating roadblocks and stoppages for yourself and letting your emotions control your training too much. To say there's one way to do that is crazy.
So do you find that, like as a coach, are you very often making changes to a person's training uh, based on what you think they need to work on from a mental standpoint? So what I mean is beyond just like we think of mental training and psychology in general as being, you know, thinking about a thing, at most talking or writing about a thing, but that's kind of where it stops. Do you take it any further than that and make like actual changes to exercises, sets, and reps based on what you think a lifter needs to work on mentally?
Not so much that sometimes, but they're very minor and very few and far between. It's more just getting to talk with them about the mental aspect and what are they thinking about when they're going through training, and trying to find out what some of their thought processes are. If there's intimidation, try to find ways to remove that. You know, I suppose about the only time that I would ever make changes to how the program is laid out is if we're not able to solve some of that intimidation from certain types of sets and reps. Then we might tweak it a little bit to make it a little easier and build up into that confidence.
Got it.
I suppose like a common one that probably can be intimidating for people is some of the like by 3 or by 5 at 9 when they start getting into some of the 9 RPE stuff, which I thought is kind of funny that seems to be a little bit more intimidating at times to people than a by 1 at 8. It's like, well, I mean, it's less weight. Doesn't that make it less scary? But not necessarily, because I suppose it's at 9 RPE that people start pushing that boundary of true capability. You know, there's a little wiggle room in a by 1 at 8 or a set at an 8 RPE as far as over or under reaching. You got to be a little bit more accurate, I suppose, with a 9 RPE. So I think the other thing there too is that normally I think the people that tend to show a bit more mental intimidation with a lot of those things are newer to RPE training. And that's where it's even more important, I think, to get them on a good even kilter page where they are starting out conservative and just building into their capabilities, and worry less about being correct on the rating and more focused on just making quality movements, and add a little weight to that each week, and be diligent on check-ins so that we can watch your lifts and make sure that, you know, maybe you start out and your by 1 at 8 is actually probably more like a by 1 at 7. Cool. That's fine. Let's build into it. I'd rather you miss that 8 and be under than miss that 8 and be over.
Yeah. So you'd rather them err on the side of like conservative weight selections, and then then they can grow into it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, one question that I get a lot, that I'd be curious as to what you have to say about it. What do you recommend for somebody who's kind of new to RPE training, or not kind of new? What if they're maybe not skilled or not experienced with RPE training and they want to get into it? What kind of process do you recommend?
Well, let's can we maybe get some more details on that first? Like, is this a person that's lifted and trained? Doesn't matter what method, just the fact that they've lifted for a couple of years and they're familiar with lifting weights.
Yeah.
Okay. Because if they're familiar with lifting weights, then I think it's just a matter of being like, hey, look, you already rate how hard a set is. We're just giving you language to be more defined and accurate with how we're rating the lift. Just like a pain scale, if you get a cut on your arm or something like that, you're always thinking about how bad does this pain hurt from a 0 to 10. It's the same thing with just rating the difficulty of the set. How difficult is the set from 0 to 10? And if you have a hard time rating it from that, then try and just think about it from how many reps you think you could have done. And that can help simplify it. And you're not going to be trying to remove some of that mental intimidation from it too. Like, you're not going to be completely accurate right out of the gate. That's okay. That's not what's important. What's important is just take your time and build into it, and you will get there. But I really think at the end of the day, it's one of those things that we all do. We all did it before we knew what an RPE was, or before anybody told us what RPEs were. It's just now we have a more defined scale to rate that difficulty of the lift.
Yeah, language around it.
Yeah, exactly. Just, you know, like, especially from a coaching standpoint now, and I tell you, oh, Mike, I had a real hard set. Well, that doesn't tell me anything. That set of 5 was real hard. Well, how hard? It was pretty hard. It was real hard. But we're just all that RPE is doing is just giving it it's just quantifying it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, you know, kind of having that language around it helps us to be more clear, and certainly in a distance environment. I mean, I think that's why there wasn't a language around it before, what, 2007, 8, when I started talking about it,
Right.
for lifting weights specifically. You know, like, that's really when people started communicating about their training a lot more online anyway. You know, prior to that, there was a lot more face to face. And if you watch somebody do a set of squats, then it's maybe less important because you all saw the set, you know, and you know, the lifter felt the set, the training partners or the coach watched the set, you know, so they're all on the same page in terms of communication. And you just need to have another vocabulary if you're going to communicate about it in an online setting, or if you're going to build some procedures around it that require some sort of quantification of the effort, which, you know, that's kind of what we did in terms of trying to provide a framework for how people go about training by feel, you know. And it's not so much I don't know, maybe I shouldn't have said it that way, because by feel kind of has a certain connotation with it. it's it's more it's more like lots of advanced lifters would tweak the program anyway based on what their capabilities were that day, which is essentially training by feel. They've got the plan, but they know if they're feeling good or they're feeling bad, and they'll tweak the plan accordingly. So what is informing that decision? Well, if the weight felt hard or the weight felt easy, well, we need to be able to be a bit more granular with it and have a more repeatable process. So
Right.
that's
Yeah.
that's
I mean, if I know if I would have had a percentage based program during that travel and that move, it would have freaking not been good in any way, shape, or form. Because like I had some of the biggest dips and some of the biggest highs in that throwaway block while I moved. It was real crazy. But one of the other little analogies that I like to use. Sorry,
it
what was
wasn't
that?
just like consistently bad training while you were on the road.
Right. It wasn't consistently bad. It was mostly just after that drive. Once I got done with the drive, that first 4-day stretch, and got some movement back in me, things started to turn back around. I was more impacted from the drive through Canada than I was the flight over to Vienna, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Particularly having like that first day, I got up at like 6 a.m. and had a flight over to Chicago and then a 12-hour layover and then an overnight flight over to Dublin. A bunch of sightseeing in Dublin for 20 hours with a 20-hour layover there, sleep for a little bit at a hotel, and then wake back up early and get on the plane over to Vienna. So it wasn't like it was an easy plane ride either. So, and that longest stretch from that first long stretch from from Chicago to Dublin, I was in the center row, center seat, last row. So it was like the worst possible seat on the entire plane. I was like, oh, this is going to be comfy. Sweet. I can't recline. I'm stuck between people that are stuck between other people.
Well, I guess that's not like, I'm trying to think about it. So it took you several days of driving to get across Canada. So the time change wasn't as much, but we're talking about significantly more time, basically just sitting in a seated position, less sleep, bigger time change, but probably more movement on your flight to Europe. So I don't know. Maybe there's a interesting lesson in there that immobility might have more to do with the crappy feeling than.
Definitely. I mean, I think there's been a positive difference in particularly like how my hips feel oftentimes now that I have a stand-up sit-down desk and I can stand up and work standing for a couple hours of the day rather than just always being sitting. And
Yeah, I've got to where I really crave that. Like if I'm sitting for a couple hours, working or whatever, I really crave a position change. Um, I don't know, sitting for long periods of time is not. I don't know. I'm not conditioned for it like I once was, which
right.
it's got to be a good thing.
Well, and I went from being conditioned from it, being in the engineering and sitting at the desk all day, to coaching powerlifting full time from home and got a stand up, sit down desk right away. And there's days still where I find myself, I'll stand the entire day and I won't even realize it. I'll just be standing and just plugging away and churning away, doing this, doing that. And it's like, oh, wow, it's 4:00. I've been standing all day. I feel amazing.
That's cool.
But no, one of the analogies that I wanted to mention too, back to RPEs, especially with kind of more novice level lifters or lifters who are new to RPE training, is again, like you're just rating how difficult something is. And especially in terms of how a lot of people get caught up on just bar speed or just reps in reserve, things of that nature. You can apply RPE to literally any activity in the entire world. And like when you break it down to something simple that everybody's done before, like say throwing a baseball, you know, most people have thrown a baseball a time or two in their life. So say you're capable of throwing a baseball, you know, 100 feet. And that's the furthest you can throw it, no matter what. The perfect conditions, perfect effort, perfect throw. Like you can throw it 100 feet. That's your capacity. So if you throw the ball 100 feet, that's an RPE 10. But now what would happen if you threw the ball 50 feet? What RPE is that? Is that a 5?
Yeah, so I think that's kind of a common. That's what you're going to get as a common answer. Is going to be 5.
Right, but not necessarily, because it depends on if you threw it 50 feet with as minimal effort as required, or if you threw it 100 feet in the air and it only went 50 feet horizontally. You could have thrown it as hard as you wanted into the air, and it didn't go as far. So your change in trajectory on throwing the ball is different, and it still could have been an RPE 10. You know, so you got to think of those things in your performance. You know, if you're going down in a squat and you get pitched way forward and you got to fight and pull it out and get into a good morning where you're not typically used to that, that's got to impact the rating.
That's a good point. I like that.
That happened in myself yesterday, actually, in my top set of squat. I got pitched a little forward. And I'm like, well, that felt like an 8 because it, like, as far as setup wise and how weight felt on my back, but I got pitched forward and my performance wasn't quite an 8, so I had to put it at an 8.5. Subsequently,
and it's easy to say too, like, well, if I had done it correctly, then it would have been whatever, you know. Like I get to that point pretty rapidly with athletes, I think, and I find myself doing it or feeling the desire to do it as well, to kind of reason yourself into whatever rating you were supposed to get. You know, if I had only done it correctly, you know, if I had I made this error, and if I had not made that error, then it would have been better. Yeah, but you did what you did, and it's a reflection of what happened, not, you know, not what could have happened if you
right.
if you didn't make mistakes.
Exactly. You know, and then the other thing to look at it when you do that, if you change it, if it would have been an 8 if everything went perfectly, but it didn't, so it's an 8.5. What does that really do to my top end? What does that really do to my E1RM? Not a whole lot. It's within where we need it to be for the training. And then, you know, like what reinforced that for myself, that had I not messed up, it probably would have been an 8, was because the back off volume was just killer. It was moving real fast. I fixed my errors that I had in my top set and grooved them right, and the speed was there, the technique was there, and everything went real well on the down sets. So to me, that's a sign that, yeah, I probably was capable of a little more on that top set, but fact remains, I didn't. So I can't call it something it's not.
No so what are you going to do next week? So you had your top single supposed to be an 8 RPE. It was really an 8.5. The strength was there. This was a technical error. Now, technical errors fall into different categories, you know, controllable errors and not controllable errors. What's your plan for next week then?
Probably retake it and just hopefully crush it.
So aim for like the same weight that was an 8.5 this week, aim for that next week and try to just demolish it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The only way that I'd go up from that is if warm-ups are just absolutely on fire.
Yeah, really banging.
Like I've gotten to feel out my last warm. I feel like I'm getting to a point where I can feel out my last warm-up real well to really gauge correctly where I have to go with my top set. And that's not always true, but it's getting there. It gets more and more accurate every time, you know. And I think that's something to consider for people that are newer to RPE training too, is that, you know, I've been working with you now for, I think, 4 years, 3 years, 4 years, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
And like there's still times where I'm still making some improvements on my rating, on my ability to rate accurately, and not let what I want dictate the rating. Just let what it is dictate the rating. And like mentally being okay with that. Like, oh man, that didn't move as fast as I wanted it to. And I feel like I could have moved it faster because I got pitched a little forward. Okay, so what? We recognize that and we correct it on the down sets and correct it next week. But I can't let coulda, woulda, shoulda change how I actually rate the lift.
Yeah, I think it's a process for everybody to kind of let go of, I guess it's ego really that makes us want to, you know, record an idealized version of ourselves, you know, but that only damages future training, really. You know? But
yeah, especially if it's a little bit more of a significant overreach and they become consistent overreaches. I mean, that's usually when I start having issues with lifters getting beat up and needing breaks and tweaks here and there and little bumps and bruises and injuries. Is the ones that are more prone to that are definitely ones that are more overreaching, and not just being okay with a little less weight on the bar, and just understand that it's the process to build the weight up. Not, you can't just put more weight on the bar just because you want to.
Yeah, you definitely get stronger and then raise the weight in response to that improved strength. Raising the weight isn't the thing that's driving the strength adaptation, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know. That seems very self-evident to me. You know, that by definition, you add 5 pounds every week, you know. By definition, that's an increase in the overload. You're increasing the stimulus, but only as long as, you know, your body is stronger in response to it. At some point, when your body's no longer stronger in response to it, you can add 5 pounds all you want, but you're not getting any stronger. You know, you start missing weights in training and things like that. That it's very clear to me that, you know, your body is allowing that type of progression to take place. That progression isn't driving anything.
Right.
I want to take you back to something that you said a minute ago about using your last warm-up to gauge the top single.
Mm-hmm.
Can you flesh that idea out a little bit more? Is it something like an RPE on that last single that you're using, or is it something else?
Usually, because it's such a low percentage single, because especially for competition lifts, when we're doing a by 1 at 8 for the top set, I warm up exactly how I would for a meet and just take a larger single than I would open with. Or I'll take what would be an opener and shoot for a by 1 at 7.5 instead of by 1 at 8. Especially if it's like week 1. So it's kind of difficult to, like, that last warm-up's about 84%. So by 1 at 84%, it's, you know, sub 6 RPE. So it's kind of hard to rate it accurately RPE wise. So normally for me, what I'm thinking about and looking at on that last one is that, like, when I unrack it and I'm walking it out or I'm setting it up, like, everything just feels great. There's no hesitation, and the quality of the rep it's got to be on point. If there's any shift in position or positional losses, or especially I know when my squat will kind of start to suffer is like as I go into the descent, I'll get a little shaky in the hips because I'm not quite hitting that groove. I'm kind of like going in and out of that groove. And it's like, something I gotta fix something here. We gotta change it up. Usually for me, that means I'm putting my hips too far back at the start and I'm not breaking at my knees soon enough. But if I'm doing that on a warm up, it's not a day to push my top set because my quality of movement's not there. So if my quality of movement's not there, even if my strength is there, there's going to be some degradation that needs to be considered in the overall performance of the lift. Whereas if I can tell that everything's, stroking real good as far as movement and the weight moves real fast, then it's like, okay, now we know today I can push it a little bit.
Like that interplay between strength and technique.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. At the end of the day, a single between anything probably between 80 and 85%, a seasoned lifter ought to be able to execute perfectly.
And it's not going to be a thing that you can, probably not going to be a thing that you can see as an outside observer. Like if I'm standing there with you and I watch you do that, I'm not going to see the errors,
Right.
They're happening at a very subtle perceptual level for you, but it's not enough that, somebody outside of you is going to notice.
Right.
I think that's really interesting, especially when technique gets to that point in refinement where, you're feeling things that are more, you're feeling details that other people can't see,
One of the good ones that Mark brought up when I was working with him at the seminar, and because I wanted to hang out with him during one of the sessions when he was working on the deadlift, and just wanted to hear some of the words and language and things that he talked about with deadlifting. And I really liked and appreciated how hard he was on setting that bottom position and setting that tension in the start. And so one of the things that he talked about for him when he knew that it was going to be a good deadlift day or not is if in setting tension and setting the bottom start position, if he can make 2 times his body weight float before he starts pulling, he knows it's going to be a good day. If he kind of struggles with that weight to make it float, it's probably not going to be that as good of a day as what would be otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah. So just to clarify, in case anybody's not sure what make it float means, about for a long time at this point, there's lots and lots of videos out there, people talking about pulling the slack out of the bar, getting tight in the bottom of the deadlift. And when you get really, really tight and you're really cranking on your lats and you're really pulling the slack out of the bar will come off the floor a little bit. And it feels effortless. It feels like the bar just floats. It feels like you just kind of get really tight and you lean back a little bit and the bar comes up off the floor. And of course, when the weight gets heavy enough, the bar doesn't come off the floor, but you still get as tight as you can, and then you start your pull. So what Mark is saying is that if he's having a good deadlift day, he can get tight enough that, that 2 times body weight number will come off the floor. It floats a little bit. It feels effortless as he's getting tight. That's before you really have intent to start the pull. Maybe this is something we ought to do a more descriptive video on, because we talk about it at basically all of our seminars. And it's a really useful way of feeling that tightness, getting an understanding of what getting tight means for the deadlift. But it's also a thing that if you've never felt that, if you've never seen it even, it's hard to wrap your mind around.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Especially how there can be the subtle subtleties in that start position too, where making sure that, you know, like you're down there reaching for the bar, and that you're pre-tensioning it by setting your back flat, not actually pushing through your feet yet and picking the bar up. I think some people might have a tendency to sort of cheat themselves a little bit on that and actually almost start to pick the bar up rather than literally just setting the start position.
That is
aren't
hugely
quite
common.
got into the movement yet.
Yeah, whenever I'm coaching the deadlift, I see that all the time. You know, people hear what we're saying right now about making the bar float, and they just pick the bar up a little bit. And that's not exactly it. Like there's a tensioning, a compression, and the bar's still on the floor, and everything's tight. And then it's leaning back, it's dropping the hips a little bit, pulling the shoulders up a little bit. But since everything is so tight, as you get into that start position, if the weight is light enough, then the bar comes off the floor a little bit, you know, a couple inches maybe. Yeah, we definitely need to do a video or something that kind of describes this a little bit more in a more visual way, because there's definitely a right way and a wrong way to do that.
Right, for sure. Like I say, especially making sure you're not bringing your legs into the movement too early.
Right.
Obviously, your legs are needed, but not quite yet.
Well, Ross, I feel like there's a lot more that we could talk about, but like I mentioned before we got started, I'm running up against a tight timeline today.
Yep.
Before we wrap everything up, where are you most active on social media?
Definitely these days, Instagram.
Okay.
I mean, I'm on Facebook, but not that much.
And your Instagram handle?
Ross_RTS.
Okay, so if anybody has any questions, wants to know about what the heck we're talking about here, I'm gonna have them contact you. Send Ross some DMs. But no, we'll have to sit down for another chat sometime soon. Always enjoy chatting with you, buddy.
Likewise.
Thanks for carving out the time, and we'll see you and hopefully a lot of other people who are listening to this in Washington in a couple weeks here. And thanks everybody for watching. See you next time.
Reactive Training Systems.